The desert wind carried dust and desperation in equal measure that evening. Sarah stood outside the crumbling gas station, her thumb stuck out toward the empty highway, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. 3 days without food had left her hollow. 5 days without shelter had taught her exactly how little the world cared about a 23-year-old woman with nothing but a backpack and broken dreams. The truck appeared like a mirage, shimmering through the heat waves that still rose from the asphalt. It slowed, then stopped. The driver was older, maybe 40, with weather-beaten skin and eyes that had seen too much. He wore a cowboy hat pushed back on his head, and when he looked at her, there was no judgment. Just recognition. He knew what desperation looked like because he wore it too. "Where you headed?" His voice was gravel and whiskey. "Anywhere but here." Sarah's honesty surprised even herself. He nodded slowly, understanding filling the silence between them. "I got a ranch about 60 miles north. Nothing fancy. Needs work. Needs someone willing to do it." "You running from something, or toward something?" Sarah felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough. "Does it matter?" "Not to me." He pushed open the passenger door. "Name's Coleman. I don't ask questions, and I don't tolerate lies. You work, you eat, you sleep under a roof. That's the deal." She climbed into the truck, the leather seat cracking beneath her weight. The cabin smelled like cigarettes and saddle leather. As they pulled onto the highway, Sarah watched the gas station disappear in the side mirror, along with the last 3 months of her life. The boyfriend who had stolen her savings. The eviction notice. The phone calls to family who had stopped answering. All of it fading into the desert behind them. Coleman drove in silence for the first 20 miles. Sarah appreciated that. She had grown tired of explaining herself, of justifying her existence to people who had never known real hardship. The landscape rolled past, endless and unforgiving. Sagebrush and stone. Sky so big it made her feel like nothing, which was somehow comforting. "You got skills?" Coleman finally asked. "I can clean. Cook a little. I learn fast." Sarah stared at her hands. They were thin now, the knuckles prominent. When had she gotten so fragile? Ranch work's different. It's hard. Sun comes up, you're already behind. Sun goes down, there's still more to do. He glanced at her. "But it's honest. And honest work saves people sometimes." Sarah wanted to believe him. She needed to believe something. "Why are you helping me?" Coleman's jaw tightened. "Because somebody helped me once. Long time ago, when I was just as lost as you are now. Old man named Garrett gave me the same deal I'm giving you. Told me a roof and a purpose could turn a life around. He was right." The ranch appeared as darkness settled over the land. It was small, almost invisible against the vast emptiness. A single-story house with peeling paint, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, corrals that needed mending. Everything was held together by rust and stubbornness. But lights glowed in the windows, warm and welcoming in a way Sarah had almost forgotten existed. Coleman parked the truck and sat for a moment, his hand still on the wheel. "I'm going to be straight with you. This place barely keeps me fed. I can offer you a room, meals, and maybe a little cash when the cattle sell. In return, you work. No games, no drama, no shortcuts. If you steal from me or lie to me, you're gone. But if you stay honest and pull your weight, you've got a home as long as you need one." Sarah looked at the house, then at Coleman. His face was hard but not cruel. Tired but not defeated. She recognized something in him that mirrored her own soul. They were both survivors, clinging to whatever piece of solid ground they could find. "When do I start?" she asked. Coleman smiled for the first time. "Dawn comes early out here. I suggest you get some sleep." Sarah woke to darkness and the sound of boots on wooden floors. She had fallen asleep in her clothes, too exhausted to care about comfort. The small room Coleman had given her held only a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was more than she had hoped for and exactly what she needed. She found Coleman in the kitchen, coffee already brewing. He handed her a mug without speaking and nodded toward the door. Outside, the world was still caught between night and morning, that magical hour when everything holds its breath. The air was cold and clean, shocking her fully awake. "Horses need feeding. Then we mend the fence on the south pasture. After that, we'll see what breaks." Coleman walked toward the barn, and Sarah followed, her body already protesting movement. The work was brutal. Her hands blistered within the first hour. Her back screamed by the second. But there was something cleansing about physical labor, about sweat and effort translating into visible results. Each fence post straightened, each wire tightened, each task completed became proof that she still mattered, that she could still contribute something to the world. Coleman worked beside her, teaching through demonstration rather than words. How to tension wire properly. How to read the land for weak spots. How to approach the horses so they trusted rather than feared. He was patient but demanding, correcting her mistakes without making her feel stupid. Midday, they sat in the shade of the barn, eating sandwiches Sarah had thrown together that morning. The silence between them had become comfortable, no longer weighted with suspicion or uncertainty. Coleman pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead. "You're doing good," he said simply. Those 4 words hit Sarah harder than she expected. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her effort? When had anyone last seen her as capable rather than broken? "Thank you," she managed. "For all of this." Coleman studied her for a long moment. "You said something yesterday when I picked you up. About spreading your legs for a roof. That how you see this arrangement?" Sarah's face burned with shame. She had been so desperate, so convinced that nothing came free, that she had made that terrible offer. "I just meant I'd do whatever it takes to survive." "I know what you meant. And I'm telling you right now, that's not what this is." Coleman's voice was firm but not angry. "You work for your keep. That's all. My wife died 6 years ago. Haven't been with a woman since, and I'm not starting now. This is about giving someone a chance, same as I got. Nothing more, nothing less. We clear on that?" Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely she nearly wept. "We're clear." "Good. Because if you're going to stay, you need to understand something. This ranch is all I got left. My daughter doesn't talk to me anymore. Says I loved this place more than I loved her family. Maybe she's right. But it's mine, and I'll fight to keep it running. That means I need someone reliable. Someone who shows up every day ready to work. Someone who doesn't quit when things get hard. You think you can be that person?" Sarah looked at the land stretching out in every direction. It was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It demanded effort and gave back exactly what you put into it. No lies, no false promises, no betrayals. "Yes," she said. "I can be that person." The afternoon brought new challenges. A water pipe burst, flooding one of the corrals. 2 horses got loose and had to be tracked down. The tractor Coleman needed to fix the irrigation system refused to start. Each problem multiplied into 3 more, and Sarah began to understand what he meant about always being behind. But she also began to understand something else. Purpose felt different than desperation. Working toward something felt different than running from something. By the time the sun set, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, Sarah realized she hadn't thought about her ex-boyfriend once all day. Hadn't obsessed over her empty bank account. Hadn't spiraled into the dark thoughts that usually consumed her. That night, Coleman cooked dinner. Steak and potatoes, simple but satisfying. They ate at a scratched wooden table, too tired for much conversation. But when Sarah finally made it back to her room, she stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the stars. There were so many out here, away from city lights. They reminded her that the world was bigger than her problems, that there was still beauty if you knew where to look. She climbed into bed feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but something close. Hope, maybe. Or just the absence of despair. Whatever it was, she held on to it as she drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever dawn would bring. 3 weeks passed in a blur of dawn risings and exhausted sunsets. Sarah's hands grew calloused, her muscles adapted, and the work became familiar if not easy. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the way each day followed a pattern dictated by necessity rather than choice. Feed the animals, mend what broke, prepare for tomorrow. Repeat until you collapse. Coleman remained distant but not cold. He taught her everything he could, treating her like a student worth investing in. Sometimes during their rare breaks, he would talk about the ranch's history. How his grandfather had built it during the Depression. How his father had nearly lost it in the 80s. How he had spent his whole life fighting to keep it alive, even as the world around them changed and small ranches became dinosaurs waiting to go extinct. Sarah found herself sharing too, slowly at first, then with increasing honesty. She told him about growing up in foster care, bouncing between families who saw her as a paycheck rather than a person. About aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a head full of survival instincts. About the men who had promised to love her but only wanted to use her. About the job she had lost, the apartment she had been evicted from, the slow downward spiral that had led her to that gas station. Coleman listened without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes or useless advice. When she finished, he simply nodded and said, "You're not that person anymore. Out here, you're whoever you decide to be." But the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. One afternoon, while Sarah was in town picking up supplies, she saw a truck that looked exactly like her ex-boyfriend's. Her heart seized, panic flooding her system. She ducked into an alley, shaking, convinced he had somehow found her. It took 20 minutes for her breathing to return to normal, for logic to override fear. The truck was a different color, a different model. Just her mind playing tricks. Still, the incident rattled something loose inside her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing his face, hearing his voice telling her she was worthless, that no one would ever want her, that she was lucky he even tolerated her presence. The walls of her small room felt like they were closing in, and suddenly the ranch felt less like sanctuary and more like another trap. She found herself outside without consciously deciding to go there. The desert night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that sharpens your thoughts rather than numbing them. She walked toward the corrals, where the horses stood like dark statues against the starlit sky. "Can't sleep?" Coleman's voice startled her. He was sitting on the fence, a cigarette glowing in his hand. "Just thinking too much," Sarah admitted. Coleman took a drag, the ember illuminating his weathered face. "That'll kill you faster than hard work. I should know." Sarah climbed up beside him. They sat in silence for a while, watching the horses shift and settle. Finally, she asked the question that had been building in her mind. "Why did your daughter stop talking to you?" Coleman's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound full of old regrets. "Because I chose wrong. Every time there was a choice between this place and my family, I chose the ranch. Missed her school plays because a fence needed fixing. Skipped family vacations because it was calving season. When my wife got sick, I was so worried about keeping this place running that I didn't see how bad things had gotten until it was too late. She died here. Yeah. In that house. And my daughter, Rebecca, she never forgave me. Said I let the ranch kill her mother. Maybe she's right. I don't know anymore." He flicked the cigarette away, watching it arc through the darkness. "That's why I picked you up that day. Because I looked at you and saw someone who needed saving, and I thought maybe if I could help you, it would balance the scale somehow. Stupid, probably." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. "It's not stupid. You gave me a reason to keep living. You might not think that matters, but it does." Coleman turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since she had arrived. "You were that far gone?" Sarah nodded. "That gas station was the end of the line. If you hadn't stopped, I don't know what I would have done. Probably something permanent." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Coleman's face showed a complex mix of emotions, sadness, understanding, determination. "Then I'm glad I stopped. And I'm glad you're here. You're a good worker, Sarah. Better than you give yourself credit for." "I'm damaged goods," Sarah said quietly. "Broken. So am I. So is everyone worth knowing." Coleman climbed down from the fence. "The question isn't whether you're broken. It's whether you're willing to do the work of putting yourself back together. That's harder than any ranch work I could give you." He started walking back toward the house, then paused. "Take your time out here. But when you come in, remember something. You're not running anymore. You're building. There's a difference." Sarah stayed on the fence long after he left, processing his words. Building. She liked that idea. Not just surviving, but actually constructing something new from the ruins of her old life. It seemed impossible and necessary in equal measure. When she finally returned to her room, she found a note slipped under her door. Coleman's handwriting was barely legible, but the message was clear: "You're stronger than you think. Prove it to yourself." Sarah folded the note and placed it on her dresser. Then she climbed into bed and, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, dreamed of the future instead of the past. The drought revealed itself slowly, like a secret the land had been keeping. First, the grass in the far pasture turned brittle and yellow. Then the creek that fed the main water tank dwindled to a trickle. By the end of Sarah's second month at the ranch, Coleman was checking the wells twice a day, his face growing more concerned with each inspection. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked one morning as they stood looking at the main well. The water level had dropped 6 feet in 2 weeks. "Bad enough." Coleman removed his hat and wiped his forehead. "We've got maybe 3 weeks before we're in serious trouble. I can haul water for the horses if I have to, but the cattle are another story. Might have to sell them early, which means taking whatever price I can get instead of waiting for the market to improve. Sarah had learned enough about ranching to understand what he wasn't saying. Selling early could mean the difference between breaking even and going bankrupt. The ranch was already operating on the thinnest of margins. One bad season could end everything. "What can I do?" she asked. Coleman looked at her with something approaching respect. "We pray for rain and prepare for the worst. That means cutting expenses everywhere we can. I hate to say it, but I might not be able to pay you this month. I can keep you fed and housed, but cash is going to be tight." "I don't care about the money," Sarah said immediately. "I'm not leaving." Something shifted in Coleman's expression. "You sure about that? Because things are going to get harder before they get better. If they get better." "I'm sure." And Sarah realized she meant it completely. The ranch had become more than just a place to stay. It had become home, and Coleman had become something like family. She wasn't going to abandon either when things got difficult. The next 2 weeks tested that resolve. They worked from sunrise to well past sunset, hauling water, moving cattle to areas with better grass, repairing equipment that couldn't afford to break. Sarah lost weight she couldn't spare to lose, but she didn't complain. Coleman was pushing himself even harder, his face growing gaunt with exhaustion and stress. One evening, Sarah found him sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements. His head was in his hands, and for the first time since she had known him, Coleman looked defeated. She made coffee and sat across from him, waiting. "I don't know if I can save it," he said finally. "The ranch. Everything my grandfather built, everything I fought for. I'm watching it die, and there's nothing I can do." Sarah thought carefully before speaking. "You saved me when I had nothing. When I was ready to give up. You told me I was stronger than I thought. That I could build something new. Don't you think the same applies to you?" Coleman looked up, eyes red with exhaustion. "That's different." "How?" "You're fighting for something that matters to you. That's worth the fight, isn't it?" "I'm 62 years old, Sarah. I'm tired. And I'm alone. My daughter wants nothing to do with me. I've got no one to leave this place to even if I could save it. What's the point?" Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. "The point is that it matters. This place, what you do here, who you are, it all matters. You gave me a reason to keep living. Don't you dare give up on yourself now." The words hung between them, charged with emotion. Coleman stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something crack in his carefully maintained armor. Tears welled in his eyes, and suddenly he looked older and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm terrified of losing this place. It's all I have left of my family, of my wife. If it goes, what do I have?" Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. His palm was calloused and rough, the hand of someone who had worked hard his entire life. "You have someone who cares about what happens to you. Who sees you as more than just a boss or a landlord. Who thinks you're a good man trying his best in a world that doesn't make it easy. That has to count for something." Coleman squeezed her hand, not trusting himself to speak. They sat that way for a long time, two damaged people holding onto each other in the face of an uncertain future. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and the promise of another dry day. But Sarah also heard something else. A distant rumble, like thunder. She stood and went to the window, hardly daring to hope. Dark clouds were building on the horizon, heavy and promising. Lightning flickered in their depths. "Coleman," she said softly. "Look." He joined her at the window, and together they watched the storm approach. It was still miles away, might not even reach them. But for the first time in weeks, there was possibility in the air along with the dust. "Maybe things are about to change," Sarah said. Coleman nodded, his hand finding her shoulder. "Maybe they are. And maybe some things have already changed more than I realized." Sarah understood what he meant. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped being just an employee or a charity case. She had become part of this place, woven into its story. And Coleman had stopped being just a benefactor. He had become the closest thing to family she had ever known. The storm hit an hour later, rain lashing the ranch with a fury that shook the windows. But instead of seeking shelter, Sarah and Coleman stood on the porch, letting the water soak them, laughing like children as the dry earth drank deeply and the wells began to refill. It wasn't enough to solve all their problems, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all you needed to find the strength to keep fighting. The rain changed everything and nothing. The wells refilled, the grass grew green again, and the cattle fattened on improved pasture. Coleman was able to wait for better prices, and when he finally sold, the profit margins were enough to keep the ranch running for another year. But the close call had left its mark on both of them, a reminder of how fragile their existence really was. Sarah found herself thinking about the future more concretely. She had been at the ranch for 4 months now, and the woman who had stood by that gas station felt like a stranger. She was stronger, more confident, no longer flinching at every unexpected sound or assuming the worst in every situation. The ranch had given her that, but she had also earned it through her own effort and determination. One morning, Coleman asked her to ride out with him to check the fence line on the north property. They saddled horses. Sarah had learned to ride, though she still gripped the reins tighter than necessary, and headed into the high country where the land rolled into gentle hills covered with sage and wildflowers. They worked in companionable silence, checking posts and wire, making notes of what needed repair. Around noon, they stopped at a small grove of cottonwood trees where a spring created a natural oasis. Coleman dismounted and pulled out the lunch Sarah had packed that morning. "I've been thinking," he said as they ate, "about what happens next. For both of us." Sarah felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "Are you selling the ranch?" "No. At least, not yet. But I'm realistic about my limitations. I'm not getting any younger, and this work isn't getting any easier. I need help, real help, on a permanent basis. So I want to make you an offer." He pulled out a folded paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to her. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. It was a partnership agreement, legally drawn up, offering her a 25% stake in the ranch in exchange for continued work and a small financial investment over time. "I can't afford this," Sarah said immediately. "I have no money, no savings, nothing to invest." "You invest your labor. Your commitment. Your presence. That's worth more than cash to me right now." Coleman met her eyes steadily. "I'm not offering this out of charity. I'm offering it because you've proven yourself. You work hard, you learn fast, and you care about this place. Those are the qualities I need in a partner." Sarah stared at the paper, hardly able to process what she was reading. "But your daughter." Rebecca made her choice. "She doesn't want this place, doesn't want anything to do with ranching or me. I've accepted that. But that doesn't mean the ranch dies with me. If you're willing, I'd like to teach you everything I know. Build something that outlasts both of us." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. "Why me? Why would you trust me with this?" "Because you were drowning, and you fought your way back to shore. Anyone who can do that has what it takes to run a ranch. And because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger and became something like family. I don't say that lightly." Sarah thought about the girl she had been 4 months ago, convinced she was worthless, ready to sell her dignity for basic survival. That girl was gone, transformed by hard work and the first real kindness she had ever known. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned she could face challenges and overcome them, someone who had discovered purpose in caring for animals and land. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll be your partner." Coleman smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was a smile without shadows. "Good. Then let's get to work. We've got a ranch to run." The following weeks brought new dynamics to their relationship. Coleman began teaching her the business side of ranching, how to manage budgets, negotiate prices, plan for different seasons. He showed her his records going back decades, explaining the patterns and cycles that govern their work. Sarah absorbed it all with fierce determination, knowing this knowledge was the key to her future. But the most significant change came unexpectedly. One afternoon, a car pulled up to the ranch house. A woman in her 30s stepped out, and Sarah watched Coleman's face transform with shock and hope. Rebecca had come home. Sarah made herself scarce, giving them space to talk. She worked in the barn, trying not to eavesdrop but catching fragments of conversation. Raised voices, tears, long silences. When Coleman finally came to find her, his eyes were wet but his expression was lighter than she had ever seen it. "Rebecca's staying for dinner," he said. "I'd like you to join us. She wants to meet the person who's keeping this place alive." Dinner was awkward at first. Rebecca was polite but distant, clearly struggling with complicated feelings about her father and the ranch. But as Sarah talked about her work, about what she had learned and what she hoped to build, something shifted. Rebecca looked at her father with new eyes, seeing him through Sarah's perspective. "You really care about him," Rebecca said as they cleared dishes. "About this place." "I do," Sarah said simply. "He saved my life. Gave me a chance when no one else would. I don't take that lightly." Rebecca nodded slowly. I spent so long being angry at him for choosing this place over us that I forgot he was still a person. Still my father. Seeing you here, seeing what is built with you, it reminds me that his dreams matter too, even if they weren't always what I wanted them to be. Before Rebecca left, she hugged her father for a long time. She promised to visit again soon, to try to bridge the gap that had grown between them. As her car disappeared down the long driveway, Coleman turned to Sarah with gratitude written across his face. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me what's worth fighting for. For showing Rebecca that this place isn't just my obsession. For becoming part of this story." Sarah looked out at the ranch, at the land that had given her back her life and her sense of worth. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The horses stood peacefully in the corral. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. "I'm not worth much," she said quietly, echoing the words she had spoken months ago. "But I'm worth more than I thought. And I'm going to spend every day proving it." Coleman put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood together watching darkness settle over their land. Two broken people who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Two survivors who had chosen to build something instead of just surviving. "Welcome home," Coleman said. And finally, after a lifetime of searching, Sarah understood what that word really meant.